Have you ever wondered how the mind is formed? I do not mean the individual mind within each of us, but this mind we all speak of as if it were one entity, the Arab mind. Let me take you on a journey, not among mountains and valleys, but across times and minds. Open your ears and allow me to speak to you not as a thinker, but as a storyteller, as a man more concerned with questions than with answers. I used to contemplate the scene, our nation torn between authenticity and modernity, between transmission and reason, between a thought seeking its glory in the past and another chasing after modernity. Amidst this confusion, I saw the Arab mind as an old mirror, cracked at the edges, yet still reflecting ourselves, though in a distorted way. There had to be a pause. There had to be a real question. What is this Arab mind? Is it a way of thinking, a system of concepts, or merely a repetition of what the ancients left behind? When I examined our heritage, I was not looking for ready-made answers. Rather, I was searching for the structure, for the way this heritage was shaped. And from there, the story began. But hold on. Before I delve into the intricacies of logic, eloquence, and gnosis, I had to lay the foundation. We cannot understand the mind without knowing how it was formed. And formation only happens within an environment, a context, a historical reality. I stood long before this idea. The mind is not born in a vacuum. It is the child of its moment, its conditions, its struggles. Therefore, the first question was not, what is the Arab mind? But rather, how is the Arab mind formed? And what made it take this particular shape? So I returned to the origins of formation, to the moment of great division, the clash between Islamic thought and Greek philosophy, between scripture and revelation on one side, and abstract reason on the other. That moment was both foundational and explosive. It was there that the seeds of the Arab mind began to grow, nourished by scripture, but soon shaped by the mechanisms of power, sectarianism, and conflict. The mind we speak of is not natural. It is a constructed mind, shaped amid intellectual, political, and sectarian battles. Therefore, its study should not merely analyze it as a logical tool, but rather seek to understand its historical and cultural conditions. At that point, I realized I was not merely studying the mind from within, but from the outside as well. I had to observe the environment, the conditions, and the transformations that produce this conceptual being we call the Arab mind. In that moment, I realized I was not writing a study, but telling a story. The story of a mind born in a conflicted world, swaying between the sanctity of the text, the authority of the ruler, the interpretation of the jurist, and the rebellion of the philosopher. And now I shall tell you that story. When I looked at the map of Arab thought, I did not see just names, movements, or books shelved in dust. I saw a burning front, a grand stage of conflicting forces, the forces of religion and politics, of wisdom and revelation, of jurist and philosopher, of narrator and theologian. Before the Arab mind was born, the land was pregnant with questions, questions of identity, of authority, of meaning. The essential conflict was not simply between reason and transmission, as we often simplify, but between different forms of producing truth, each driven by a different authority. The authority of politics, or of scripture, or of the rationality imported from Greek philosophy. In the early days of Islam, there was no such thing as the Arab mind. There was a movement of descending revelation, of a society forming, and of escalating struggles, from the day of Saqifa to the day of Siffin. And in all these phases, the mind was being born, gradually, but not as a free mind, rather as a functional tool, used either to justify or resist authority. When Greek philosophy entered the house of Islam, it came cloaked in translation, through Syriac and through the ambitions of caliphs who saw in Aristotelian logic a means of reinforcing the sovereign mind. It was not an innocent import, it was conditional. Thought is only imported when it serves the ruler, not when it promotes free thinking. Thus, the mind began to take its initial shape, a mind combining Aristotelian logic, Mu'tazilite interpretations, Hadith scholars' rebuttals, and jurists' polemics. It was not a single mind, but a conflict between multiple minds, speaking the same language, yet disagreeing on the rules of the game. And at the heart of this conflict, there were three intellectual forces that would later form the three pillars of what we came to know as the Arab mind: bayan, eloquence; irfan, gnosis; and burhan, demonstration. We will return to them shortly, but let us first look at what came before this final formation. The Abbasid state was at the height of its power. The theological debates were ablaze in mosques, salons, and palaces, and each faction recruited the mind to serve its vision. The Mu'tazilites made it a servant of Tawhid, divine unity, and justice. The Ash'arites used it cleverly to limit its role, and the philosophers elevated it to the level of divine light itself. As for the jurists, they resolved the matter. The mind is a follower, not a leader. It is only to be used as long as it serves the text. And amid all this, where is the Arab mind? It was not something ready-made. It was a process, born out of this massive interplay, out of this fierce conflict among religion, philosophy, politics, and society. It was not a free choice, but a directed formation. And since this formation happened under the shadow of power, it was natural for the Arab mind to take on a domineering traditionalist and self-enclosed character. The Arab mind, then, was being formed within a triangle: state, religion, and tradition. Each angle imposed its conditions on thinking, on methodologies, on sources of knowledge. Thus, the mind was not shaped to be a tool of discovery, but a tool of justification, justifying doctrines, systems, heritage. And here lies the crisis. If we want to understand the Arab mind, we must not study it like mathematical logic, but as a historical phenomenon, through its conditions of emergence, its formative battles, and the alliances of thought with power. This is the framework we need to understand what is to come. We are not standing before a pure mind, but one laden with culture, heritage, authority, sectarianism. A mind formed to protect, not to create, to manipulate the text, not to question its meaning. Only now can we begin our journey inward, toward the three pillars that shaped this strange entity we call the Arab mind. When I closed my eyes and reimagined the scene, I did not find myself in a mosque or a legal school, but in a battlefield of ideas. That was the domain of theological reason, Akil Kalam. The science of Kalam was not merely meditations on God and his attributes, but from the beginning, it was a response to a political crisis manifested in disputes over the caliphate, justice, and predestination. From the question, who has the right to rule, and is man free or compelled, the spark of theological reason ignited. The mind here was not free. It was a mind on demand, serving doctrine, justifying sects, and defending the community. I saw the Mu'tazilites, in a bright historical moment, raise the banner of reason, laying the foundations of thought upon justice and divine unity. But in practice, they did not liberate the mind. They chained it to doctrine. Then came the Ash'arites, responding not in the name of reason, but of a reason framed by transmission. They built a complex doctrinal system, rejecting anthropomorphism, affirming divine acquisition, and practicing a balance between reason and text. But at its core, they neutralized critical reason. And at the far end, we saw traditionalist Salafism, which denied the mind, excluded it, and considered it a source of discord. And so, the circle was completed. From a mind that deifies itself to one that is restrained to one that is eliminated. Thus, Kalam turned into a closed dialectic, where the mind reproduces itself within the walls of sectarianism, never leaving them, never questioning them, but rather fighting their enemies in their name. This was the first manifestation of the intellectual crisis in Arab culture. Then, I moved to the other corner of the intellectual arena, where juridical reason, Aqua Fiqh, sat enthroned. This mind was not unfamiliar to me. On the contrary, it was quite familiar, for it had governed the lives of Muslims for centuries. But the surprise was that, upon closer inspection, I discovered that it was not merely a legal mind, but a political mind par excellence. Fiqh, in its essence, is a process of interpretation, a striving, ijtihad, to understand the text. But it soon evolved into a system of governance and a mechanism for social control. And the mind that produced jurisprudence no longer asked, what is the wisdom behind the ruling? But rather, how can I justify the ruling? The juridical mind was built on analogy, qiyas, on linking cases to similar precedents. But it kept turning in a closed loop. It depended on the text, interpreted the text, and reproduced it according to rules set by the jurists of various schools. Each school constructed its own world, a state within the state. This mind did not practice thinking, it practiced regulation. It was a legislative mind, a mind that feared doubt, loathed uncertainty, and adored finality. And while it evolved externally, it was closing in on itself internally. Fatwas were repeated, legal cases duplicated, and the mind transformed into a classification machine. The result? A mind that legislates, but does not think. Then, I found myself before the last attempt. The philosophical mind, AQL falsafeo. This mind came from outside, yes, but it tried to establish itself within. When Al-Kindi translated Greek texts, when Al-Farab built his virtuous city, when Ibn Sina merged spirit with reason, and when Ibn Rushd defended philosophy against Al-Ghazal, we thought that the mind would finally rise. But this mind remained rejected. Why? Because it did not arise from social necessity, nor from popular culture, but came as a foreign body. The jurist fought it, the theologian resisted it, and the commoner feared it. The philosophical mind was a demonstrative mind, IAQL Burhan. It loved proof, revered order, and sought truth through gradation. But it was neither politically nor socially fortified, so it lived as a stranger and died suffocated. It tried to liberate the Arab mind from the authority of transmission, but fell into the trap of Aristotelian imitation. It tried to create a universal mind, but was rejected for not resembling us. Thus, the attempt at liberation was aborted. At that moment, I realized the problem was not only in the theological, juridical, or philosophical mind, but in the cultural fabric itself. In our world, culture is not composed of adjacent branches, but of an interwoven network. The jurist is influenced by the theologian responds to the philosopher dialogues with the mystic, and the mystic is judged by the jurist. There is no epistemic independence. Every form of knowledge is produced within a system where each watches the other. Hence, any attempt at intellectual reform fails because it clashes with the rest of the network. You cannot reform jurisprudence without reforming its theological foundations, nor restore the status of philosophical reason without confronting Bayan culture. Arab culture is not a mosaic. It is a tight fabric. If you pull one thread, the whole structure trembles. Then I arrived at what I called the crisis of cultural time. And finally, I realized that everything that came before had one origin: the era of codification, Ashr al-Tadwin. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Hijri calendar, when scholars, jurists, exegetes, and hadith narrators began compiling knowledge, this codification was not merely an act of preservation, it was an act of boundary setting. The codification of hadith, jurisprudence, grammar, and theology meant the fixation of rules. And from the moment codification occurred, the door of ijtihad, independent reasoning, was effectively closed, even if it remained theoretically open. Codification gave Islamic culture a solid structure, but at the same time, it froze its development. Since that moment, we have entered into a closed mindset, a mind that does not produce the new, but merely rearranges the old. In the natural world, time moves forward, evolves. But in our culture, time has stopped. We live the present with the mind of the past, treat our heritage as if it were the present, and reproduce it as if it were the future. Our concept of time is not linear, it is circular. We think as the ancients thought, and we revolve around the same questions. Is the Quran created? Is man free or compelled? Is ijtihad permissible? Old questions posed as if they were new. This is the crisis. We re-ask the same questions, with the same tools, expecting different answers. Our cultural time is frozen because it has not known epistemic ruptures nor deep transformations. It has not lived modernity as a transformation, but as a shock. Now, after I've told you about the journey and opened for you the gates of the 3 intellectual cities that have governed the destiny of the Arab mind, the city of Kalam, the city of fiqh, and the city of philosophy, you may ask me, what comes next? Is the story over? Is that all? I answer you, no. The story is just beginning. What I have narrated to you is nothing but a map I drew because I saw the Arab mind lost, searching for itself, finding only its old reflections. I saw it as if standing in front of a broken mirror. In every crack, a different image, the image of the jurist, the theologian, the philosopher, the ascetic. And every image claims to be the original, and the poor mind does not know who it really is. But the mirror cannot be fixed by staring at it. It must be fixed through action. The Arab mind today needs to see itself from outside its reflection, to rebuild itself, not only based on what it has inherited, but on what it can produce. We do not need a new mind that comes from nothing, nor a radical break that annihilates tradition, but a critical process from within, a critique that does not demolish the walls, but reveals their foundations, questions their logic, and rearranges them upon a new base, one that embraces history, but is not enslaved by it. What we will do is not imitate foreign thought, nor glorify the past, but search for the self within the self, because the mind, ultimately, is not what we possess, but what we create. And because the future, as I see it, does not begin from zero, but from where we stopped, provided that we know why we stopped and how to move time forward once again. So come, open the next door. Our journey is not over.